Hey, kids, and welcome back to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. I've been at this for a long time. I used to have a wonderful announcer's voice back in the 1970s, but now I'm kind of I'm getting up there in years. I wish I had the old spunk I used to have. I was the master of the diaphragm, or at least that's what my old girlfriend Betty Lou used to tell me. Oops. But anyway, back to wrestling. I really enjoyed doing some ring announcing, and I used to bring, towels, water bottles to the wrestlers in the locker room. Those were the days. But wait a minute, we don't have to miss them. We've got Bob and Joe, who will go toe-to-toe. And also on this edition, we have one of the greatest writers in wrestling. It's got a little of everything. All that and pathos on the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Hi, everybody. This is Bob Smith. You might remember me from my days with Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine, and this is the Outdated Wrestling Hour. How are you today? Our co-host is sitting at the ready here, ready to hit us with his knowledge, wisdom, and humor. It's Joe Puccio. Joe, how are you?
I'm doing great, Bob. Thanks for another edition here of the show. I'm looking forward to this one.
Well, we're going to get all literary again, don't you know? As you know, as a former writer in the professional wrestling milieu, I enjoy a good tome now and again about pro wrestling. And today we have one of the great writers who honors us all, because this gentleman is such a unbelievable talent and so smart and so knowledgeable. He could have written books about anything, but he chooses to write them about pro wrestling. It's Ian Douglas, on for his second edition of the show. Last year, I read his second Steve Kern book, and it absolutely floored me. I went out and bought the first one after I read the second one. It was one of those deals where it's like, I can't believe how good this book is. And there's the thing about today's wrestling writers, Joe. Right around the time that Brian Solomon's book, Blood and Fire About the Sheik, came out, the effort that's put in, the meticulous amount of research, the incredible amount of facts in these books, they differ now than other wrestling books that were sort of biographies or autobiographies from the past, because it's not a bunch of hearsay or here's how I felt or first person written biographies. These are different. These are historians who are really looking for history. I'm going to let Ian describe all about his book when he comes on, but this is really starting to be a golden age for wrestling books. And later this year, we got Brian R. Solomon coming back with his book about Gorilla Monsoon. Too much, man. Too much.
I mean, with Ian Douglas, yeah, I completely concur about the Steve Kern books. I did the same. I read both of them, both fantastic books. I got the opportunity to speak with Steve as well, and that was great. And he just had nothing but great things to say about Ian. He's a great writer. He really gets down deep into the subjects. As far as what you're saying about, the golden age of wrestling books, it's true. I mean, it's funny because about 20 years ago, when this whole thing started, you remember when Mick Foley came out with the first book?
Right.
And people were shocked. They were like, wow, a wrestler could actually write a coherent book, a book that actually makes sense and is actually, going in a lot of different directions and is layered and this and that. And everybody loved Foley's book. Then obviously he came out with several more. In those years since that book, I mean, now it's just been taken to a different level. I mean, you get these well-researched books, these books that have no right as being as good as they are. And Ian I think, is just one of several authors now that have books that you just really are anticipating. And I'm also really looking forward to the Gorilla Monsoon book, like you just mentioned, because again, I don't know that there's ever been a book on Monsoon, and I'm really, really interested in his life.
Well, you're a writer with some credits. I'm a writer with some credits. I am telling you, the fact that Ian Douglas bothers to even look at pro wrestling freaks me out
Exactly.
because you've seen his writing style.
Yeah.
His writing is perfect. It's so professional and journalistic that he could have chosen to write about any doggone thing he chose to write about. He chooses pro wrestling, and I'm sure he's not done in the genre. I think he's got more up his sleeve. A tremendous talent that we're all very lucky to have working on wrestling books because it's like this is important stuff. I mean, the Kern books. Did you know that Steve Kern lived anything like the life he lived before you read those books?
I did not. No, I mean, you're right. And you're right. Ian, I really hope Ian is not done. I hope he continues to write more on in wrestling subjects. And as you and I think you've discussed this before in the podcast. I mean, writing a book is so much different than what you and I have done over the years. You know, the writing for whether it's magazines or newsletters or websites and things like that. I mean, it's a completely different type of writing. It's something to be applauded. I mean, to write a book and to dig deep into these subjects like they are doing and like Ian has done is really, really impressive.
Well, the new book, I'll have you know, we'll talk about this in a few minutes, but it was edited by another great writer, Oliver Lee Bateman from The Ringer. If you've never seen the Ringer website, boy, is that good. As complete journalistic, real journalist eye on pro wrestling stuff. Like the whole website isn't wrestling, but they have a wrestling component to it.
Yep. Yep.
Absolutely fantastic. I mean, top notch. You feel like you're reading the New York Times. Yeah, I can give no better compliment than that because it's like these guys will not just write an article, they will detail an article until it's finished. Maybe it's because they might have the luxury of not having a hard and fast deadline all the time. Like they're going to work on a particular piece and really work on it. That's important for any writer, I think. It's not like me churning out 6 articles a day at PWI. And I
Right.
did that. Trust me, I did that a lot.
Right.
But here, I think these guys may have the luxury, like I said, of really getting their fingernails dirty about a certain subject matter, and it shows. It really shows.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the Ringer, and to be honest, yeah, I've read a lot of the articles on the Ringer. Generally, through it'll usually be maybe promoted. Meltzer maybe would promote it in the Observer. He'll talk about a story on a particular wrestler, and he'll direct you to that article, and that's when I'll read it. One thing that always stays in my mind is that they usually really, really lengthy. And they're really in depth, and it's very impressive with all the details and, like you said, the research that goes into it. So that's one thing I take away from them. One thing I always think about is when I do interviews with a subject, after I do my interview, I'll generally transcribe it. And then I spend a considerable amount of time going through that and picking out what quotes I'm going to use and how to sort of make it into a coherent story. And that's just maybe a 30 or 45-minute interview. And then when you see these books that are being written nowadays by these great authors, I mean, that's going to be that times 100. I mean, the amount of interviews that they have to do and the research and the talking to different people and people from their childhood and friends and family, and then having to go back and pick out the key parts that how you're going to make this into a full length book is just that much more incredible.
It really is because it wasn't always this way with wrestling books. I want to go back to the late 70s, early 80s with y'all. The first wrestling book I ever bought. Now, here's why it was the first wrestling book I ever bought. It was the first wrestling book I ever saw. There weren't a whole lot of wrestling books back in the day. Wrestling was a closed shop. It was the Kaiser magazines and the London magazines. Nobody was writing books. And then one day, this big, colorful book comes out called Main Event by Roberta Morgan. I loved the book when I bought it, but it was written totally kayfabe. Totally kayfabe. I mean, it was like it was written by a fan. And I'm not putting Miss Morgan down for that. I couldn't because those were the times. I believe it was Backlund versus Superstar Graham on the cover. That's the era, I think, that this came out. And it listed all the great stars and a lot of color section in the center and a lot of photos in it. It was just a look, I think, for the uninitiated about pro wrestling. I liked it. It was rife with errors. I mean, it had errors in it. If I went back now, I'd probably be laughing at a couple of the spots because stuff wasn't even close. They misspelled names and stuff like that. But the
Right.
fact is, it was needed because there was nothing like it at the time. And I remember the book was very WWF centric. It wasn't all the other federations didn't get as big of a plug as they did. All I know is this: it was the start of something because then wrestling books started to come out. But by the mid '80s, a miracle of a book came out. A miracle of a book came out called Drawing Heat, and the book was about the Dave McKigney traveling shows in Canada. And he managed to get in this book direct quotes from the Sheik. The Sheik talked to nobody. We're talking the original Sheik, right? He talked to nobody for years. Nobody
Right.
had
Right.
access to him. And the book is peppered with these acerbic behind the scenes quotes from the real Sheik. How he did it, I have no idea. All I know is that I devoured that when it took me a while to find a copy of it. It's still kind of rare out there. But if you could find a copy of Drawing Heap, get it because it's like one of the seminal works of our time. It changed. It was the Ball 4 of wrestling books. You know how Ball 4
Wow.
in the '60s, Jim
Yep.
Bouton opened up, showed you behind the scenes in the locker room, showed you
Sure.
talked about how some of the players would do things you would never dream they would do. That's what Drawing Heat was for the wrestling business. And there was another book called, I guess it was Jarvis wrote, Whatever Happened to Gorgeous George. I glanced at that book, never really read it. All I know is I was totally satisfied with Drawing Heat. That was just the beginning of a new era of wrestling books. Have you ever heard of that book or have you read it?
I have not. I've never heard of this book, but that sounds great. I mean, just getting quotes from the Sheik, that's pretty insane. I mean, especially back then in that era.
Jim Friedman. Drew Friedman was another guy. Believe it or not, Drawing Heat is still available by Jim Friedman. You can get it at crowbarpress.com. McKigney with the wrestling bear too. He was that. It's a story of these guys on the road. It's well worth seeking out this book. And the talks with Dave Wildman McKigney and all the other wrestlers there. Some interesting things about Louis Martinez. I just remember reading this book and I was like absolutely flabbergasted at how open it was. And I'm happy to report that Crowbar Press still has it in print, ready for you to order right now for $19.95. So I may put a check in the mail or use my credit card because I don't know what I did with my copy of it. I would
Okay.
love to read the book again.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, and that's a pretty reasonable price too. You know.
Yes, absolutely. Crowbar Press is pretty cool. They got a lot of old school wrestling books. I should mention that because it's like it's a source that old school fans know, but new school might not know. So crowbarpress.com, check it out. But we've all read our share of wrestling books. And do you have a favorite?
The one that stands in that stays in my mind is Bret Hart's autobiography. I remember when that one came out. I remember it's really, really long. I remember it was a little daunting when I first got it. I was like, not that you don't expect these books to be as long as they are, but that one was really detailed. And I think Bret has said the reason why he was able to make it so lengthy, it was a freaking tome. I mean, it was crazy, was because he actually, from the day his career started, he took notes and he kept a diary of every match he ever had. And that's pretty insane to think about because guys back then weren't really doing that. You could see maybe wrestlers of today doing that. But back then, I don't think most of the boys were thinking about, writing down the match they just had and the attendance and things like that. So it was so detailed. And Bret's a great storyteller, and he's very opinionated. So that's always been one of my favorite books. That first Bret Hart book, and I don't even know what year that came out. That's been out. That was quite a number of years ago now. Did you read that one when it came out?
No, I did not. It's odd that
Yeah,
I didn't, but I didn't. But me,
it's
Mr. Busy. For
yeah,
me to sit down and read a book, when I say I'm going to read a book, oh yeah, I have some books that are favorites of mine. I always like Keith Elliott Greenberg's Fred Blassie book, Listen to Your
yep,
Pencil in the Gate. I only because I was fascinated by Blassie. I still am. He's still kind of a mystery to me, the early Fred Blassie, but I like that book. Ian's books are amazing. Brian Solomon's Chic book, incredible. And George Shire's History of Minnesota Wrestling is still available and just a treasure trove of AWA stuff. I mean, it's like there's nothing else like that out there. I would wholeheartedly recommend it. But there's 1,000 books. The new Bigger, Better, Better by Keith Greenberg is going to be a huge deal if it's not already. It's just a wonderful time to be a wrestling fan. I'm glad I made it this old because Even though I was with the magazines, I'm still learning stuff every day through these books. Do you feel the same way about that? You're learning new things.
I do. Anytime I read one of these books, it's usually pretty quick. As soon as I'm within a chapter or two, and I am discovering something I never knew. I'm also really looking forward to reading the Keith Elliott Greenberg book on WrestleMania 3. I have it in my possession. I have not started it yet. I'm actually right now about 100 pages in for the new Barry Horowitz autobiography. So everybody knows Barry Horowitz, one of the perennial enhancement talents in pro wrestling, one of the most popular ones from the 80s and 90s. Book called Wrestling is My Gimmick, My Life on the Wrong Side of the Three Count. It's different, you don't get a lot of books written by guys of his stature, guys that maybe didn't get a lot of wins and they were sort of giving you their tales from a different perspective, about talking about what it was like to kind of go in and out all these territories and putting all these guys over, making them look good. And this one has thus far been really interesting. So that's another one I'd like to recommend.
That sounds really good.
Yeah,
I'm going to check that out. And if you hear from him or have an in from him, see if you'd like to come on the show. Because you know what? I always admired him.
I will. I will.
He got little pushes in Florida and in other places. I would never call him a jobber. He was too good. Yeah,
Same.
he was really a good wrestler. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. He was so good. That's one of the things. I mean, I actually will be speaking with him within the next week or so, coincidentally. So yeah, I'll definitely mention it to him. But no, you can't call him a jobber. Or even if you do call him that, I mean, it's the enhancement talent tag or the jobber tag. I mean,
No,
I think we're all,
jobbers. You know who jobbers were? The nameless, faceless guys in the '70s who were out of
yeah,
shape. That here comes George Steele. He's going to decimate him in 35 seconds. Those are jobbers. You see them once or twice, you never see them again. They get thrown in the
right,
ring to be raw meat for villains. That's to me the definition of a jobber. Joe
right, right,
Turco wasn't a jobber. SD Jones wasn't a jobber. Cicluna definitely wasn't a jobber. There's because they had past history. So no, to me, a jobber is a guy who wrestles 3 times in his whole life and loses in 15
right,
seconds and goes away. Do you agree with
right.
that? That's my interpretation of the word.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I just don't think, and I think we've all grown enough, and guys like you and I, and who've been watching wrestling all these years. I mean, we understand the fact that these guys might have had these jobs on television every single week where they'd be on. I mean, literally every week they'd be on our TV sets losing, and what would they get? Maybe one win every 6 months or a year if you're lucky. And we know it's a business where that really doesn't matter. The point is, if you are able to entertain, if you're able to do your job well, and what these guys did was do their job well simply because they were able to put these other guys over and make them look good. If they didn't have these guys to be their foil, they wouldn't be getting over. So it's such an underappreciated in many ways role of these wrestlers, and it's kind of sad that you don't really have that anymore because of the way the wrestling business has evolved, where most matches are going to be superstar versus superstar.
But you know what, though? I lived in B town for WWF, right? The B town, not the Garden, the Armory in Albany.
Right.
When you went to see those shows, you would see the guys who lose on TV evenly matched against each other, if you can imagine that.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
Steve King versus Jose Estrada, right? That you wouldn't see that on TV, but you see the guys in the lower spectrum wrestling each other and getting wins or going to 20-minute draws or what have you. So there was a whole different side to these guys. You find out they could actually work.
Right.
You didn't see it on TV because when Steve King, who came up to my belt buckle, would wrestle Bob Orton, he'd get squashed in 3 minutes. He never got even any offense in. But when you went to Albany to see Steve King versus Joe Turco, you could see him drop kick. You'd see him bound the ropes. You'd see him fly off the top rope. You wouldn't see that on television.
Right.
So they
Right.
actually had work to do outside of TV, some of them. The Steve Kings, the Frank Williamses, I don't want to use SD Jones because he was a little bigger than that. But that strata of person you would see on TV who go, oh, he's going to lose again, and he would lose again. But if you went to a B town or a high school card, and there were plenty of them in those days, they
Yep.
worked all the time. They worked all the time.
Yeah. Absolutely. Guys like Steve Lombardi for
Right.
a period there, or even Mike Sharp.
Mike
Uh,
Sharp had a history in Canada and in other
Right.
federations where he was pushed. It
Right.
wasn't until he got to WWE they decided to stop pushing him.
Right, right. And I think the only times you did see those matches that you're talking about on TV would be like the C show, and it would be one of these like Saturday night, maybe I think WWF had like Wrestling Spotlight or something like that, where they would show you just matches from, let's say, some arena, some low level arena where the match would be joined in progress. And it would be these two guys that generally were losing on TV each week. But that's it. You would never see it on the A show. You would never see it on the B show. It would be one of the secondary shows. But yeah, that's the point, is that these guys could work for the most part. You couldn't just put in any schlub out there to lose to the big star, because it wouldn't work. They wouldn't know how to do the job correctly. So yeah, Barry Horowitz, 100%, great talent. I've always thought he was really underrated.
Also known as Barry Hart for a while, I think.
I believe you're right.
You had a
Yes.
few different monikers, and a good long career. He had to work 15 years or so. You probably know better than I would, but I'm looking forward to reading that book because that sounds good to me. So speaking of book, one of the great authors, Ian Douglas, in just a couple of moments, get yourself a hot toddy, get yourself a hot chocolate, get yourself an ice cold Diet Shasta, whatever you got in the fridge. You're going to need it because you're going to come back and hear from the erudite and exciting Mr. Ian Douglas. Don't you go anywhere. Well, I reckon it's time to do a little bit of an update for the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Let's see what shows you can enjoy several times every week. They've got a veritable cornucopia of wrestling podcasts, so let's dig into it. Pretty much the flagship of WrestleCopia is the Wrestling Memory Grenade. Join host Ray Russell as he analyzes and discusses years of wrestling history from your favorite promotions. From Hulkamania to Mulkymania, from the Midnight Express to the Lex Express, they've got it all. Tune in and get a big piece of history on the Wrestling Memory Grenade. If you like nostalgia, this one's for you. The Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop. What a legend Bob Roop is, and he welcomes you to the Wrestling Stoop as he shares stories, historical moments, and all kinds of memories from his 20-plus year career as a wrestler and booker. And you know he got wild near the end of his career. Find out all of it on the Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop. One of the most unique wrestling podcasts anywhere is DG's Puro Wrestling Academy. Join host Dan as he travels back in time to discuss the history of pro wrestling in Japan. He's spent decades studying the world of Japanese pro wrestling. Now he offers up his historian-level knowledge to you. You'll learn something on every single show, I guarantee it. That's DG's Puro Wrestling Academy. The great Gene Jackson hosts the Retro Wrestling Review. That's RE-View. Brings in a variety of co-hosts and wrestling legends to the program as he goes back in time to watch and review pro wrestling from years goes by. Get the breakdown, hear never-before-heard stories, and feel free to watch along with them. It's worth it, let me tell you, especially if you're a USWA fan. Enjoy the Retro Wrestling Review. When this show started not all that long ago, it was called Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert. Now it's Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich, two of the great stars from Memphis and beyond. You'll learn all about them, hear great old school stories, stuff you've never heard before, definitely on Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich. One of my personal favorite podcasts out there is Wrestling Nostalgia with Dave Dynasty, a meat and potatoes name for a anything but a meat and potatoes show. Join him as he reminisces about pro wrestling history with a variety of legendary guests and topics. And what I like about him, he knows everything about Dick the Bruiser, Bruiser Bedlam, and the WWA. But that's only part of what you'll hear on Wrestling Nostalgia with Dave Dynasty. It was the WWF versus WCW, Raw versus Nitro, the Monday Night War, the Ratings War, the NWO, the Attitude Era. Now, there's a podcast all about it. It's called Monday Warfare, Raw versus Nitro. They break it down with episode reviews, you name it. If you want to know all about that classic ratings war, listen to Monday Warfare, Raw versus Nitro. One of the most unique podcasts you'll hear anywhere is the Other Ship podcast. It's a pop culture contest with a pro wrestling lean. Join a rotating group of co-hosts as they talk movies, sports, music, TV, food, and of course, pro wrestling. They take on various topics of roundtable discussions, special guest interviews, and other content concepts. As they say, laugh your ass off on this voyage aboard the other ship. New episodes are in the bag for the Captain's Corner pod. Join Captain Nick as he presents the Captain's Corner podcast. It features old school wrestling interviews and discussions, plus all the latest goings on in the world of the Captain's adventures. Nothing else quite like the Captain's Corner pod. Also on the WrestleCopia network, the Glory Days GrappleCon cast. Hosts Barry and Captain Nick present the Glory Days GrappleCon podcast featuring memories and special interviews with wrestling stars of the past and even those of today. There's even more at WrestleCopia, a podcast called TR Shocks the World, the WCNN News, and the Power Hour. It's quite a lineup with more new podcasts joining all the time. It's the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. How do you get involved? It's pretty easy. Go to their constantly updated website, WrestleCopia.com. Click a few buttons and take a voyage into wrestling's past, present, and future. Get it all at WrestleCopia. There are certain people that I book for this show that my knees knock and my hands tremble and I get all sweaty. Here's why. I am an old writer and editor, as you all know from my PWI days, but we have reached the golden era of wrestling books. There's no question about it in my mind. The first book I bought that was a wrestling book was called The Main Event around 1978 or something, when people weren't doing wrestling books. It was basically a fan writing about WWF wrestlers. I enjoyed it. Roberta Morgan was the author, but it was really just kind of, I bet you didn't know this. I bet you don't know what wrestling is. We've come a long time since Roberta's book. We are definitely in the golden age. 2025 is going to be perhaps the best year for wrestling writing in the history of the planet. And I have one of the best writers right here. You may know him from The Ringer. You may know him from his other cascade of tremendous wrestling books. And he's got a brand new book already on the best-selling charts on Amazon. It's called Gentleman Jack and Rough Rufus, The Rise of Black American Wrestling. It's got a foreword by none other than Dave Meltzer. Our friend Oliver Lee Bateman edited it. And this gentleman is back on our show. It's Ian Douglas. Ian, I am so happy to see you, man. Welcome back.
I'm happy to see you again, Bob. Thank you for so expertly reciting the intro that I wrote for you. I really appreciate it.
I specialize in those things. Brian Solomon fell over once. You know, I had Brian on the show, and I actually did jot a few words down because I am of such awe of today's writers. Because you guys, it was a different era when I was with PWI. We wrote a lot of kayfabe stuff, and everybody knows it. And then the door's been flung open and that stuff too. But we would, you know, I was a real journalist before I joined there, and most of our staff was real journalists.
I was about to say, you guys were really good and still are. Don't sell yourselves short now.
Oh, but you know what? Today's PWI with Brian and Al Castle and Mr. McElmaney, the editor, may be the best PWI of all time. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't.
It's square bound, full color, and covers everything. And they will put an indie wrestler on the cover, which is something we would never do back in the day. And it is so comprehensive, like we never were. Like I'm talking Mexico and Japan and every independent federation you can think of. So I always give them a shout out. If people haven't seen PWI like yourself, avail yourself of a copy, and I think you'll flip. Because you know what?
I will do so.
It is as good, if not better, than it's ever been. And I'm proud of those boys. You know, and the young ladies that work there too, because it's like it's the lineage. You know, the history continues, and it's the only wrestling magazine published in North America now. So I think it's great. I think it's awesome.
Well, that's staggering to think about. I remember, and again, I was not a big magazine person, but I remember like perusing the newsstands and seeing 4, 5, 6 wrestling magazines, and to hear that we're down to one. That's quite shocking, actually.
Well, you know, I think it was kind of osmosis in that regard because, you know, WWE started to, when I was with the magazines, they had kicked out all the wrestling magazines WWE had. They were doing their own magazine and their own publications and books and what have you. So it kind of eroded, I think, a lot of the lesser titles first. And then, we put out so many different, Inside Wrestling, The Wrestler, titles that were around sometimes since the 50s and 60s, but one by one they went away. And I think the reason for it was twofold. When I was coming up in the magazines, it was the era of the newsletter, and they were fresh and new at that point, and they were more immediate than a wrestling magazine could be. And number two, the internet,
Yeah.
the web. People want that stuff and they want it now. And I will say that you can't get on the internet a nice poster that you can put up on your wall. That's the one thing I think wrestling magazines always had going for them, is a centerfold poster or something like that. But I miss the days of peruse. Hey, listen, I was a full-grown adult when I got the job at PWI, and I was still buying wrestling magazines back then. It was in my blood,
What was your workload like there?
At PWI?
In terms of what you were expected to deliver, word count-wise, on a weekly, monthly basis?
I put it to you, Mr. Douglas. I'm a hack, but at one point, I considered myself the most prolific magazine writer in America around probably, let's see, I started in 88, probably around 91. Because I'm in Hudson News in New York City. Remember the big magazine stores at Grand Central Station and stuff like that? And a friend says, "What do you do for a living these days?" I said, "Come here, I'll show you." And I counted my name in 23 different publications on the racks at that point. I was prolific. I was freelancing. I was still working for PWI. My name was in all different kinds of magazines. I could sit down and write a wrestling article in 45 minutes. Easy. And I believe the word count was 1,200 words?
1,200?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That sounds about right. It's funny too, a little of the secrets of PWI. We would write the headlines before we write the articles. We would have a meeting once a week, regardless of the publication we were having, and we would write the headlines and then write an article. It's usually, in the real news world, you write an article and then somebody writes a headline for it.
Yeah.
We did the opposite. Bill Apter would tell us what's going on in the federations, or I would bring something up that I had seen somewhere, and we would formulate the magazines that way. And it was all contingent on what photos we had, obviously, or what we could take ourselves. God, I miss those days. It was the most, you know what? It was just a fun job. And I will say I busted my ass. There's no question about it. Ass to sacked. That's why they made me a managing editor after, I think, 3 years there. I just, I could churn out a lot of copy real fast.
Yeah, I used to think I was crushing it at Mel Magazine. I was doing, on average, 2 fitness articles a day at about 1,500 words. They were taking me 2 hours a pop to do, and I thought I was absolutely crushing it. So to hear 1,200 words in 45 minutes of quality content, I'm feeling humbled right now.
Depends on what you consider quality, I guess, in my case. But no, and I did stuff like ratings. The whole time I was there, I did the ratings too, and different duties. And then when I became managing editor, it was like put the thing together and do the same writing you did before. So, we had a staff though. I mean, Craig Peters, Dave Rosenbaum, Andy Rodriguez, myself, Bill Apter wrote a little bit, Stu Sachs wrote a little bit. We had a guy named Chris Bernuka at the end. We had Gersh Kunzman for a while. We had a staff.
Yeah.
We even had, if you could believe this, one of America's top sports writers right now, Kostya Kennedy.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
He's written a lot of these biographies, and he's one of the top heroes. He wrote a few wrestling articles for us.
Wow.
Which I find to be unbelievable. And Al Bello was our assistant photo editor, who now is one of Getty Images' top sports photographers. So we definitely had quality people going in and out of that office. It was absolutely, you didn't know it at the time because we were all younger, but you look back at it, your mind boggles.
Yeah. Well, I mean, right now with, you mentioned earlier, Oliver Lee Bateman, who's Oliver is one of my best friends. We talk every single day. Given everything he writes about, everybody he writes for, it sometimes amazes me that in the midst of all the political editorials and commentary he writes for some pretty prominent news publications, he's also writing wrestling content. And I'm like, so in real time, I'm like, I can't believe that the guy who writes this is also writing this. He's phenomenal.
He is, but I will say the same thing about you. I don't know if you listen to the show all the time, but I bring you up quite often. And I always say, we are lucky to have Ian Douglas focus on wrestling when he could write about anything he felt like writing about, which is obviously true. So we are
Debatably true.
lucky to have you because you know what? It's real journalism in a sea of how do I put this? We're all knee deep in the eider down. I don't know. We're all kind of in the wrestling world. It's like the blur between reality, facts, and showbiz has never been like deeper. You know, it's like as far as the door has been flung open, and there's no such thing as kayfabe anymore, what have you. By the same token, everything blurs in wrestling. Do you agree with that? Everything kind of blurs. Like if there's a legit injury, was it part of a storyline? Nobody can tell predetermined from real.
Mhm.
As far as people think they're smart to the business, I don't think they're smart at all.
Yeah. And with respect to book content, I don't know if this is where you intended to go with it, but there's a lot of nostalgia bait content out there. And I think that's what you have to do in some cases to get your book approved by the large publishers in order to guarantee that you can get a check and make some serious money.
Mhm.
And I always start from the standpoint, I have the books that I've co-authored. And if someone comes to me with a book project and I think it's interesting to me, I will hop on the project lickety split. But the books that I've gone solo on, the Bohemian Rhapsody, which is the history of pro wrestling in the Bahamas, and then the Gentleman Jack and Rough Rufus book, that's a case of me looking for the book I want to read, not being able to find it, and then saying, well, I guess I'm just going to have to research it and write it myself then. And if nobody else reads it, that's fine. At least I got the book that I wanted to read out of it. So that's really what's behind my motivation is the the bulk of my motivation, not the totality of it, but wanting to write the book that I want to read and that no one else has written.
Now, as far as Gentleman Jack and Rough Rufus goes, it wasn't that long ago that you made your first appearance on our show, and you were kind of dropping little hints about it. You didn't want to say what it was about at first. Now, I guess it's just several weeks ago. I'm speaking with you online, and you go, "It's out." Or somebody alerted me. I said, "That fast?" It seems like you wrote this relatively quickly. Am I right or wrong about that?
You're not wrong about it, but here's the deal, and the cat's already out of the bag on this one, and to some extent, there wasn't a whole lot I could do about it. Were you able to read the Clarence Bolden article that I wrote for The Ringer?
Yeah.
Okay. So the reason that came about is because last summer I was challenging myself to at least do sufficient work to write a comprehensive pre-civil rights Black wrestling history book. And in my mind, that meant I needed to be able to encapsulate the careers of every major or semi-major figure from 1880 to about 1950 in between 2,000 to 5,000 words. For the record, that's where we get the Clarence Bolden article from, because I discover Clarence Bolden in this process. I write the 5,000 word summary, and then I go to my editor at The Ringer, Cal, and say, hey, just so you know, no one else has this. Are you interested in it essentially as an exclusive? He said, yes, absolutely. And that ran on the last day of Black History Month. When we're in the closing stages of the editing, he says, okay, this is of a forthcoming book of yours, correct? This is from a forthcoming book of yours, correct? And I said, yes. And he said, okay, well, then we need to run it and credit it as an excerpt to a forthcoming book. So I said, oh, well, okay, if it's helpful, I certainly don't mind. And so then when I spoke with Meltzer later that day, did the interview with Meltzer and Garrett, I let them know that, yes, by the end of this summer, I hope to have a separate book out which is a somewhere between 500 and 600 page comprehensive pre-civil rights history on Black pro wrestling. The only reason I bring that up is because that's the book that was in progress when I got to Jack Claiborne and said, I can't possibly summarize this and do it justice in 20,000 words. There's no way I can do his career justice in 20,000 words. So I have to make this a larger project. And I probably got to around 60 to 70,000 words or so on him. Then I said, you know what, I should probably offset this by, with Claiborne being in my mind, the top Black babyface wrestler of that era. If I could sort of offset that and offer a bit of a counterpoint by also profiling the top Black heel wrestler of that area who worked in a lot of the same areas and territories. And that's how Joseph Alvin Godfrey, the original Rufus Jones and the original Tiger Flowers, worked his way into the mix. That's where that came from. And as soon as that was over with, I got right back to work on the other book project. Instead of taking 1 month to work on Claiborne and 1 month to work on Rufus Jones the way I expected, that wound up taking me from September straight through to the beginning of March when this book was released. So that's the real backstory behind it.
As you're compiling the book, as you're writing it, because it is a long time ago, I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into something like this. It is a piece of history that is you're going to bring a lot of people this story for the first time, that they've even heard of these wrestlers. Now, astoundingly, like I said, your sales on Amazon look really, really strong, and I'm gratified by that, because I was thinking in terms of your rank and file wrestling fan, would they be interested? Well, the answer appears to be yes, and I find that kind of pleasing.
Yeah. Interested enough. Again, we were talking before the show started, and I mentioned that as long as one person who wasn't a friend of mine or a blood relative bought the book because there was a genuine interest, then I was happy. If it turns out that only 5 people or 10 people purchased the book because that's who's interested in it, so the reason I wrote the book was because I was interested in the subject matter. If the total market for the book consists of 10 people, then they're the right 10 people, as far as I'm concerned. And I wrote it for them, and that's as many people as ever need to read the book, and I'm happy with it. Fortunately, there have been more than 10 people who purchased the book.
Well, I'm excited about the next book too. You and I had talked about that briefly, and then, well, describe that again, because I'm really looking forward to that one, and I want people to hear about it and kind of whet their appetites for what's coming up.
Oh, the second book?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. The second book is going to be a comprehensive overview of Black pro wrestling history from 1880 to 1950. Not a ton of it takes place in Europe, but some of the events also take place in Europe. And one of the reasons I wanted to do it, I do think, and before I say another word, I'm also blaming myself for this. I'm not just pointing the finger outward, I'm pointing it inward. I think there has been a lot of performative writing about Black pro wrestlers and Black pro wrestling, especially in the month of February, when people want to get their Black pro wrestling history pieces out. Unfortunately, within those pieces, there's far too much extrapolation about who was the most important or who was the most significant or who was the most underrated. And just from doing a little poking around, it occurred to me that there are probably at least 20 names that are absent from the conversation that need to be included before we can have a true discussion from a firm foundation about who was there and who mattered. And I wanted to get all of it out on the table from 1880 to 1950 chronologically, so that we know who mattered and who did what when. Now let's have the discussion, now that everyone has access to the same information and we are no longer guessing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the purpose and the service that I hope this book fulfills, is that we will finally know, not exhaustively, but substantially, who mattered, who they were, what they did, what trials and tribulations they faced, and let's have the discussion, or let's do the ranking now. Maybe when BET is coming out with a list of the 10 or 15 or whatever it was best Black wrestlers of all time, and the only wrestler they include on the list whose career began before 1980 is the Junkyard Dog, you've got a problem. And so hopefully I'm helping to provide a solution to that problem, so that I'm not just sitting around complaining about it. I'm actually doing something about it.
You and I had a conversation online. In fact, you kind of wrote to me. You asked me a question once. This is going back, 6 months ago or something? Like, you remember this? We're kind of messaging each other on Facebook, and you asked me a question. Forgive
Is it
me if
about
I.
Ron Simmons?
No, well, no. Well, sort of. It was a question that really opened my eyes, not only to the question itself, but my own thoughts about things.
Mhm.
And we were talking about, I think a question to sum it down. What was it? I think it was something like, can you name all the Black world champions, or something similar to that? Or, can you name 5? Can you name 4? And I'm thinking, um, and I couldn't think. I mean, Ron Simmons pumped into my head.
Okay, I remember I sent you an article I did for
Yes, you did.
Splice, and it
Right.
had to do with Hall of Fame numbers. And it had
Oh,
to
it was
do
Hall of Fame numbers. That's right. Okay.
and it had to do with sort of the criteria that goes into selecting Hall of Famers. And my gripe would have been, because this is factoring into my decision to work on this book at the time, something like the Wrestling Observer newsletter. And I love Dave Meltzer. I mean, I know there are people who don't care for him. I love him, and they can complain about that opinion if they want to. But the Wrestling Observer newsletter Hall of Fame, I mean, a lot of what weighs into that, given the audience that's voting, and I'm one of the people who has a vote on who gets into the Wrestling Observer newsletter Hall of Fame. The criteria tends to be some combination of work rate, whatever that means to the person who's attempting to decide what work rate means to them. So their match quality to some extent. And then for the wrestlers of whom we don't, or for whom we don't have much in-ring footage, then there's an over-reliance on resume, and resume gets shorthanded as how many championships did they win, or what championships did they win. And the problem I have with that is, when I can count Black pro wrestler championship reigns of really any kind pre-1950 on one hand, how is somebody like that, who worked for promoters who was not going to give them an opportunity to win a championship, how is someone like that supposed to be fairly considered for any sort of Hall of Fame? That was the underlying basis for that, behind that question, is, first of all, we need to know who these people are, but then how do we rank them historically with to any degree that's appropriate, if if all we're doing is counting up championship reigns and they weren't allowed to win, and comparing them to the people who had plenty of them and they weren't allowed to win championships.
Right. The plight of the Black African American wrestler in the United States. I reasoned with you. I remember telling you that a lot of this was based on, let's face it, wrestling booking was kind of a Southern type strategy. everybody took their cues from Southern wrestling, and it reminds me of the line from the old Blood, Sweat, and Tears song, God Bless the Child, rich folk may give you a crust of bread and such. You can help yourself, but don't you take too much.
Mhm.
And I get the feeling that's what African American wrestlers went through for decades. They would be stars. They would main event in many cases. There's so many of them, Thunderbolt Patterson and Bobo Brazil, and just go down the list of people who did, but how many times they get a championship belt around their waist?
And some of
And
those,
they
yes.
drew people, they drew people. I mean, look at the Junkyard Dog in Louisiana. It was incredible.
Mhm.
Incredible.
Yeah. And some of the guys you mentioned actually got a decent number of opportunities to carry gold around. When you look at from the book, Rufus Jones, whose real name was Joseph Alvin Godfrey, who got his start wrestling for Charlie Gordon in the Boston area in 1932 or 33, he is given it's really a local championship, but he's given an opportunity to wear the world middleweight championship for a few months in his first year of in-ring activity. Ultimately, he passes away in a tragic car accident as Rufus Jones in 1951. And between 1933, when he held his first championship, and 1951, he didn't wear another championship belt for the entirety of his career. And he may have been the top heel in the Midwest for 12 straight years. Nowhere else does that happen to anyone else, but that happened to him. And but for the fact, Charlie Gordon, also the guy who brought in the Black Demon, George Hodison, brought him from Springfield to Boston. Hodison had been known as Zelis Amhara in Montreal, renames him Sealy Samara, and brings him in as his world heavyweight champion. And that's around the time when Paul Bowser was making Steve Crusher Casey the world champion. They're having their little promotional battle. Bowser wins, and they don't even do a unification. Samara just is no longer referred to as the champion, and Crusher Casey beats him in straight falls. But Charlie Gordon, who is also the guy who brought in Sealy Samara as his world heavyweight champion, and Sealy Samara later has two brief reigns as world junior heavyweight champion in Montreal. He has arguably his greatest popularity in the Midwest for many years, winning no championships. Goes to the Pacific Northwest, wins the Pacific Northwest heavyweight title, holds it for 5.5 months, goes back to the Midwest, and that's it for the remainder of his career. So we're talking about guys who had 20 plus year careers, who were box office for all intents and purposes, who one of them has one reign with one championship title. One has a reign that's very abruptly terminated, has another 4 that were relatively brief. And that's it for Samara's career. So in a 20 plus year career, you could pack all of his championship reigns into a 7-month period.
Amazing. And here's the funny thing. Like you say, they drew people. These stars drew people. Usually that's the conduit that makes you a champion. I don't care what anybody says. In wrestling, you got to be popular to be on top.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're achieving the popular and not being rewarded for it, well, sign of the times, right? I mean, it's right. I can't put it any other way. I don't know why fans wouldn't embrace them.
Why they wouldn't?
Why promoters wouldn't have them as championships for longer?
Yeah, I discussed that in the book, and I kind of get it. I understand the fact that promoters probably thought it was too risky. I mean, I get into issues like in the Metro Detroit area. The black men in the Metro Detroit area on average are earning 40-50% of what the white men in the Metro Detroit area are earning during the same time period. if I'm a wrestling promoter during that period of time, if I make a black wrestler the dominant champion in an extent in a bid to attract black fans, how many black fans can I attract before the white fans are no longer comfortable showing up to the same venue? Also, if the black fans in the area on average aren't earning the same amount of money, am I flushing money down the toilet by not catering my business toward the fans who have the most money to spend? Like I get all of those arguments. It's just very unfortunate that it probably hurt them in terms of their wallets back then. It hurt them in terms of the number of championship reigns that they were able to accumulate during that period of time. And ultimately, it hurts them historically, because when all we have to look back on that people get are numbers of championship reigns and their duration, then they're going to come up short by almost every comparison metric to their white peers.
True. And I it makes me remember that this was long before baseball got integrated too. It's like everybody looks at, what was it, 1956, I believe?
46.
46 with Jackie Robinson.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And it's like, this was long before them. And you're right. There was a different way of thinking about people who didn't look like you back then amongst the white folk. There's no question about that. All over the country.
Yeah.
And it was a long educational period in America about, accepting everyone on an equal playing field. And finally, things changed. But wrestling didn't really follow that, that plot as closely as you'd think it might have, going into even the 1980s and 90s.
That's where things really begin to look silly. The article I wrote for Splice, I talk about how much value the Virgil championship reign of all things, with the unsanctioned $1 million championship belt, how much weight that carried. And that's because after the Soul Patrol of Rocky Johnson and Tony Atlas, after they lose the tag titles, and it was 84 or 85 when they lost the tag titles, there wasn't another black wrestler carrying gold on, and I need to be careful the way I phrase this. You didn't have another black pro wrestler winning gold on WWE programming until Men on a Mission. They won the tag belts during a house show, and they coughed them up before they ever appeared on television with them. So really, you have to go all the way to Ahmed Johnson with the Intercontinental Championship before you see another black wrestler on the nationally televised version of WWE with a championship belt.
You see, that's what boggles my mind. And you shook that out of me. It's like we're talking about just plain old championship reigns. And I was scrunching my eyes going, I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
And you just recanted that. I mean, it's like, holy smokes. And I didn't, unless someone points it out to me, I didn't even realize it. I was with the magazines all those years. I remember writing when Ron Simmons won what was the NWA.
Yes. Yeah. WCW.
I remember writing, and this is almost a quote from, he was a Wrestler of the Month in one of the magazines. And I wrote, it's not a question of how many months Simmons will hold the championship, but how many years. And I meant it. I thought.
Wasn't it 5 months?
Yeah, it was like 5 months in real time. Yeah. But here's the deal. I looked at him as the new Bruno Sammartino. I really did. I thought he would develop a fan base just like Bruno did. Basically, African Americans will get behind him. White people will get behind him because he was such a great multi-sport athlete. They were promoting him, with his college, football coach. Everything seemed really, really upbeat to me about his reign. It was different. Nobody saw it coming. They promoted her for about 2 months, and bam, he had the belt.
Mm-hmm.
And he was good in the ring. He was entertaining. So I'm sitting there in Rockville Center, naive Bob, going, this is going to be the biggest thing since sliced bread. I'm doing the typing motion with my hands. Well, like you say, it was like 5 months, and it kind of just fizzled, and for reasons I don't understand. But here's the problem. It's how things are promoted. It's always how things are promoted. It's not always the effort of the athlete. It's the packaging around it. And if you lighten up on Ron Simmons' story and who he was and how he got there, here comes Vader or somebody. I forget who beat him, but it's like,
Yeah.
it just they just let it die. And well, you know what? Devil's advocate, WCW was in such goofy straits at that point in terms of management. It seemed like they had a new crew managing every 6 months, a new booker, a new executive vice president, people flying around left, right, and sideways. So I think Ron got lost in the sauce.
One of the things, Mike Rotunda is a shockingly good friend of mine. I talk to Mike once a week, and he talks a lot about going on to WCW programming with the Varsity Club, being this mouthpiece for Syracuse University, and bashing the crowd. And here he is, this guy from up north. And I said, and he mentioned to me, like, he was getting letters from Syracuse saying, please stop doing what you're doing. You're doing a disservice to the university. And I was saying, Syracuse should have been writing you checks for promoting the university on national television every single week. But it occurred to me when he was saying that when you lean so heavily into university affiliation, I mean, I'm living down here in Durham, in Durham, North Carolina, and once you get outside of Durham, there aren't a whole lot of people in the area that love Duke University. Like, not even in the state of North Carolina. So when you lean so hard into a collegiate identity, then you start to stoke the ire of everybody who feels like their sports team has been wronged by that university. And I imagine the Steiner brothers didn't do very well in Columbus, Ohio either.
But it's funny. I look back at the Varsity Club. I thought it was a novel. First of all, you had all of a sudden the evil taskmaster Kevin Sullivan had a whistle and a ball cap on, pretending to be a football coach.
That made no
And
sense.
the guys were all acting like goofy jocks. Yeah. I thought it was kind of refreshing personally, but again, there's another thing. They just kind of let it fall by the wayside.
Yeah, Rotunda loved that. And by the way, since we brought up his name, Oliver Bateman, his piece in The Ringer on the natural disasters, earthquake and typhoon, was published today. He and I both absolutely adore John Tenta, who was a middle school rugby star who starts wrestling in high school and is getting by just on size, wins a world junior heavyweight champion at the world junior heavyweight championship in amateur wrestling at the super heavyweight level, goes on to LSU, and compared to the guys that he's wrestling at heavyweight, he's not very experienced. He's getting crushed by guys like Baumgartner. But aside from that, though, he really is this athletic prodigy. That tiger on his arm is due to the fact that he was an LSU Tiger. And then he goes on to get recruited for sumo, and he goes on this incredible run. And I had to think that I figure if somebody like Watts gets a hold of him, he's John Tiger Tenta, and he's wearing the purple and gold of LSU, and instead he goes to the WWF, and he's the Canadian Earthquake. I messaged Rotunda to ask him about Tenta, if he ever talked about amateur wrestling with him. And he said, no, but I don't doubt he was incredible. He was one of the most phenomenal athletes at that size that I'd ever seen. And I said, and I showed him the clip of Tenta being a world junior heavyweight champion at super heavyweight. And I said, that's the Varsity Club we needed, was Rotunda and Tenta. And,
yeah. I didn't even know Tenta's story. I'll be honest with you. And as he aged, he fell through the cracks in the wrestling world. He's not with us anymore, and I think he should have been held in higher esteem than he was as an amazing athlete. There's this problem: wrestlers get consumed by their characters, and you forget there's a real person in there with a background and athletic ability, or they wouldn't be in the ring in the first place. And Look at Tugboat, who will be tarred forever with the Shockmaster blunder. That's all some people remember about him. But by the same token, these guys were really, really good athletes.
Incredible power lifter. Like,
yes.
Ottman was an incredible power lifter.
There were two guys I was following in the PWI years before they became stars. He was one of them. The other was Nick Busick, who I thought was the strongest guy pound for pound I ever saw. So naturally, he joins the WWE and becomes a comic book character, right? I mean, it's like a big bully Busick. Looked like somebody in a 1930s comic book or Popeye or something like that, right?
I got stuck in the elevator with him in Columbus at the Arnold Sports Festival. He was selling his vitamin packed cigars in Columbus. So I got stuck with him in the elevator. It was great. He was a really nice guy.
Vitamin packed cigars?
Yeah.
In other words, you smoke the cigar and you'd get healthy? Is that what?
Maybe in theory. I never looked into it, if I'm being honest.
No, I had some. I think I spoke with him a couple of times because I at one point PWI was writing. This is something for the Star or the Sun, one of those supermarket towns. There's a PWI page. I think it was in the Star or something. I can't remember. Don't hold me to that. But I got stuck with writing the damn thing. I'm like, So at one point, I wanted to point out how strong Nick Busick was. And I talked about him in Georgia Championship Wrestling, or some little federation he was with at that point. And I remember he went on television and goes, we made this magazine talking about our little federation. And I don't think he ever forgot me for that. But the thing is, he was legitimately tough. I mean, he probably lift the weight bench, lift anything he needed to. He was really strong.
In 2012, I ran into him in either 2011 or 2012, and he was still absolutely humongous. And the Arnold Sports Festival, you're walking around, and there are plenty of muscle bound freaks. Walking the floor at the convention, and he fit right in. Even really 20 years removed from his heyday as a pro wrestler, he was still colossal and looking like a guy who worked out on a regular basis. He could still sling some weight around.
Yep. And speaking of slinging weight around, so things are looking really good in your writing career. Tell me what life is like for you these days. In terms of, I know you're busy, but are you juggling as much as I think you are? It seems like you've always got your finger in several pies at the same time.
I've got another book, 99% written, that I'm not allowed to tell anyone about.
Oh,
I know. This book, the one that's due out in June, I would venture to guess it's 80 to 85% complete. And I can't wait to turn that. What ends up happening is I work on these things nonstop for so long, and then I want to hand it over to Oliver to do some editing, because at that point I'm sick of looking at it. I'm hoping to turn it over to him sometime in May to take a close look at it, and then hopefully I'm getting it out sometime in mid-June. Another book project that I might be interested in working on, and again, it's another one that I don't want to say anything about. I'll let you know about it if we pass, let's say, the 80% mark, and it seems like its release is imminent. At that point, I'd probably tell you about it. But yeah, as far as staying busy, I try to put 1 hour a day into either research or writing behind whatever personal project I'm working on, and I consider all of these books personal projects. And it doesn't matter whether you throw 1 hour a day at something or you throw 8 hours a day at something. The hours I found that the hours all add up the same way over time. It's the hour that I'd probably otherwise be devoting to playing a video game or something like that. And thanks to writing books, I don't think I've really played a video game in 4 or 5 years. And instead of attaining my temporary dopamine or whatever it is from playing that self-contained video game, my hobby results in books that I can share with the world. It has benefited me professionally as well. So there will be more coming from me. Go ahead.
I kind of admire something you're doing. And this is going to sound strange. Just from a business perspective, you're essentially self-publishing, right? This is your own imprint. this is your own thing. You get it. You handle the thing from soup to nuts. I am finding out from both musicians and writers of late, it's the way to go. You keep more of your profits. Of course, spreading the word is up to you, of course. But the thing is that it's more equitable. For instance, I equate it to be like being on Bandcamp as a musician. It's a conduit to all these independent artists, right, of all different genres of music, except you buy directly from them as opposed to listening to it on Spotify where nobody gets paid. And I think it's healthy. I think what you're doing is similar to that in this regard because it's like there's got to be some fruits for your labor, and I think it's a smart way to go. And I've met 2 or 3 authors now said, "Yeah, I'm gonna self-publish." I had Michael Cavaccini on a few episodes ago. He said, "I'm gonna self-publish too." So I think that there's no stigma in it anymore as long as you can get the word out. Am I right about that?
You're correct. If I couldn't self-publish, I wouldn't do it because just thinking about the timetable, um, if I had an idea to work on a book right now, and let's say it's one of those that I wouldn't work on unless I was guaranteed a check of a certain size from a publisher. Well, in some cases, I need to write a first draft and I need to shop it to a literary agent, and then they need to shop it to a publisher. And that process in and of itself could take a year after the first draft is written. And then it finds its way to a publisher, and the publisher wants to tinker with it, not necessarily because there's a quality issue, but the publisher is thinking about how many trees they need to die in order for this book to get released, and how many and what they're going to be charged to print all of these copies. So if you send them something 400 pages, they may say, sorry, we need to cap it at 300. So you need to figure out how to chop 25% of the content out of your book and still make it a quality project. So by the time you begin working on a book and get the approval from a publisher and then get it released, you may not see the book released for 4 years. Or if you are willing to take ownership of everything and say, okay, I can go on YouTube and I can figure out how to format a book properly. I can figure out how to edit all of the photos and lay the photos within the manuscript properly. I can purchase the ISBN and the barcode myself. I can go out and find a competent artist to do the artwork for me and pay whatever is necessary there. I can be confident, and also, I mean, you've got the project management, portion of the brain working, where you're figuring out the shortest path and what tasks can be overlapping in order to get things done as quickly as possible. But in this case, I mean, this is sad, but on the morning that I was heading out to Colorado Springs to Jamie Hemming's funeral, I received a draft from Oliver saying, okay, I reviewed it. Anything I thought needed to be changed, I changed. Take a final look. I'd already had the cover in my possession for 3 weeks. So by the time the trip was over with, this was a 1-day affair. I made it to Colorado Springs. I made it to the funeral. I paid my respects. I was there for 2 hours. I was driven straight back to the airport, got right back on a plane and flew home. But by the time the trip was over with, all of the final changes that needed to be made to the manuscript were made. It had all been uploaded to Amazon and it was released 2 days later.
Wow.
So I mean, if you have control of the process, it's just like that, and you don't have to wait on anyone else, and you don't need anyone's approval. And you don't need to rely on somebody telling you that your project has no merit and therefore they're not going to publish it. If you think your project has merit, you can publish it yourself and you don't need to go through anyone else to get it accomplished.
You mentioned the thing about page counts. I will say this. I was in publishing in various newspaper, magazines, and book forms from I think I started in 81 through 2021. It's a long time.
Mhm.
Every single year, newsprint, paper, printing goes up. It's gone up every year in every formalization you can think of. Right now, it's prohibitively expensive to print anything.
Mhm.
It's reached a crisis, and now because of some silly tariff thing I'm hearing about, most of the newsprint in the world or the paper that they use comes from Canada. So if we get into some kind of a silly tariff war, it's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
printing anything is daunting right now, and I'm sure that it's probably even a factor in your life.
Not so much because this is not an instance where I concern myself with the bottom line. I hate to sound so punk rock about it, but it's not. But it's about the music, man. It's not
Okay.
about the money. I just want to put out the best product I can. And if I don't make a dime, then I don't care. I get the satisfaction of putting out the book that I wanted to read and that I wanted to give people. And if it happens to make any money, then great. But if not, again, and there are a lot of authors who would say, look, if I don't make this much money off the project, it's a waste of time. I compare it on a day-to-day basis with what I could be doing with that hour I spent. To me, that's an hour that would probably otherwise be wasted on something dumb. Or I'd be playing video games and instead I'm writing and researching a book. So at the end, I get the same satisfaction that I would have gotten out of playing a video game, except I get the pride of putting a book out at the end of the day.
I love it. It's like Pete Townsend said about being a musician: "Do it, be damned for the money." That's the quote. He said, "If you love it, do it."
Yeah.
Like you only have one life. If you have chosen something, do it. Do
Yeah.
it. Don't let anything hold you back from doing
I'm a Clash fan. I'm a Joe Strummer guy, and Strummer was the
it.
guy like they put out the double album. They snuck that in because they wanted to screw the label, and they made less money as a result of it. But they wanted to give more to the people, and they didn't care if they didn't make any money.
There you go. There you go. Well, I hope you make a few simoleons anyway. And again, the name of this book is Gentleman Jack and Rough Rufus: The Rise of Black American Wrestling. Congratulations again. I don't know what to say other than you're pleasingly prolific, and it's kind of cool the fact that this is out now and you've already got something else down the pipe and another thing after that down the pipe. So it's like you're going to be around for a while. I have a feeling.
Well, my wife's going to shut it down sooner or later, so I need to sneak as many as I can. I need to sneak in as many as I can under the radar before that happens.
There's a good question. How do you juggle all this with a family life?
A lot of a lot of negotiating, and a lot of yes, dear, and
Mhm.
and a lot of quality family time on the weekends to make up for it.
This is the year I'm going to at least semi-retire. It's going to be this year,
Okay, so
and because
So, are we going to get another album out of you then?
no albums are done. I have a hearing problem right here. I can't sing like I used to.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's all right, no problem. I'm looking at it, trying to get it fixed as we speak. So maybe I'll hold the microphone again for the first time since 2009. But I digress. No, I just want to smell the roses a little bit on my way out the door, so to speak.
Mhm.
And I am still, and I always have been, from my PWI days, from my newspaper days, to other things I've done, my day job now, I'm a workaholic. I've always been work, work, work. And my dad was work, work, work. My dad worked for fun. He was so busy. He was a foreman in a cement mill, but he could build houses with his own two hands. And all he did was work, but he loved it that way.
Mhm.
However, my father stood up at the age of 70 and dropped dead. So I want to have a final chapter where I can actually look at some flowers or go somewhere and see something I haven't seen before, that type of thing. So I want to slow down. So I start 2 podcasts. Am I stupid? What's wrong with me? I got to tell you, this stuff takes a lot of time if you do it right. I swear to God, it's like People think, oh, you're just talking into a microphone. There's a lot to it. There's a lot to it. A lot to anything if you're trying to do something of quality.
Well, for
And
starters, you had to read a 480-page book. You didn't just show up. You had to
well,
prepare.
that's that too. And I have a tendency to do that for all the authors who are here, other than, somebody who hasn't put something out yet. But no, it's like it's a labor of love.
Yeah.
You ever do something just like I said, if I don't make that much scratch from it, who cares? But there's two things I want. I want to enjoy it myself, and I want it to be of quality. And I think I know the wheat from the chaff. I know something good from something bad.
Mhm.
And I think this podcast is pretty good.
Yeah.
Considering I hit the scene 3 years ago without even so much as making an announcement, it has charted every episode. It's been doing fine. I don't know what to say other than I thank everybody who listens and
Well-
people like you for coming on the show.
Well, it's an honor, and the only thing that matters is whether or not you're enjoying yourself, and you
Yeah.
think it's a good use of your time. You don't need to care about anyone else's metrics for success, because the majority of the people with an opinion aren't doing anything anyway. I remember people. It was on one of Cornette's pages, and they were they were
Oh yeah.
they were complaining about something I wrote, and they didn't like that I was too kind to Court Bauer and MLW or something like that, and they were being so critical, and I was just laughing, because I'm thinking they have no idea how much my quality of life had to improve for me to get into the position for them to criticize me.
I know. And the interwebs is just rife with strife about stuff there shouldn't be strife about, like the not eternal, but last 5 years, the AEW WWE war. Who cares?
Indeed.
Watch it or shut it off. That's really all this is, folks. I mean, there shouldn't be a turf battle between federations. It makes no sense to me. It's just rancor where you should be having a good time.
I don't know what fan is extracting that much of their personal identity from what their preferred wrestling production or company is. Yeah, it's intended to be entertainment, and there's no need for there to be a bunch of name calling over which form of fake fighting you like the most.
Can you imagine in the 1960s if it was like I Spy versus Mission Impossible? And people would be writing each other. No, there's no way this is a better show than your show. And then they would get all up in arms about it. I can't fathom what's going on right now. Watch what you like, and it's your choice to what you like, and that should be it. Who cares if somebody else likes something else? Now look, the constructive criticism of some of the product that goes along with anything, and let's face it, critics can be fun to read.
Mhm.
I used to love rock critics back in the 70s and 80s, and I've always enjoyed a good journalist who writes about music or sports or anything else. But it's the fans that are just sniping and calling each other all kinds of slurs and names. It's just it's getting ridiculous at this point. Do you agree with me, or is it just me?
100%. And if you're on Twitter, you see Dave Meltzer. He gets accusations of being on AEW's payroll. And the second he says anything remotely negative about AEW, he gets criticized. He gets criticized for that as well. I guess Tony's check didn't clear this week. Yeah, and
Look.
you have people.
For the fifth time, I don't care about Dave Meltzer's star ratings. But however, 40 years ago, he became wrestling's preeminent journalist and reporter.
Mhm.
There's no denying it. That's
Right.
what made his name. Everybody in the business, every fan, everybody in the world was reading him to get information on places they couldn't see at that point when he started out with his newsletter, because there were still territories then. He covered everything. And he had the immediacy of putting out a weekly newsletter as opposed to magazines like ours. Did Dave Meltzer erode our business? Yeah, you bet your ass he did, because it's like people love the immediacy of the newsletters as opposed to waiting 6 weeks for a magazine. Once it went to the printer, that's when it got on the newsstand. But I'll tell you what, he changed the way the game was played. He's the Michael Jordan of wrestling journalists.
Yeah, and he deserves. I will always give him credit for what he has done. And I think part of the issue, because Dave got started in the 70s. I interviewed him for a Mel magazine piece where we were acknowledging the 40th anniversary of when he went national with the
Mhm.
Wrestling Observer, um, which he appreciated. But you have a lot of young fans who've grown up. They they were born into the internet era, and they don't understand, like, okay, Meltzer's a guy online, I'm a guy online. Why does his opinion matter so much? And I mean, he's one of those people who had a first mover advantage, and he's been around for the better part of 5 decades now in some form or fashion. And
Right.
I mean, I get the perspective that they weren't around when it developed, but you have to have an appreciation for the lay of the land when he got started and all of the work it took for him to get to the level that he's at. And there are a lot of people who don't want to give him credit for that. And at the same time, I agree with you. The star ratings, like, who cares? Watch the
Mhm.
match. If you like it, great. If
Yeah.
not, so be it. What do you care what a grown man thinks about a wrestling match?
And I'll be honest, he has said some things that made my eyes bug out. I'm like, "What?" You know what? He's entitled to that opinion. When you pick up an Observer newsletter, well, there's no such thing in paper anymore. I go back to paper, kids. But no, the thing is, don't conflate opinion with news, with the hard facts that he publishes with every edition of the newsletter, Wrestling Observer newsletter. There is a difference, and some people go, "Oh, he's not a journalist." Yes, he is. Don't even go there. I don't wanna hear that.
Oh,
It's
he
like
was doing
people
s- he
the
was
stuff
he was
people
cover
say, it's just so mean-spirited.
he was covering high school sports down in Texas. He wasn't always sitting in the Bay Area typing on his computer. He was getting out and actually covering real sports in person in different states. So you can't say that he didn't pay his dues as a real journalist. Um, and doing that overlapping with what he was doing with the Observer in his free time.
Mhm. Right.
Mhm.
You know, he was the originator of the entire newsletter deal. Everybody, Wade Keller came afterwards and a bunch of other fans did some quality newsletters, and there still are to this day. And, there's some people that cover wrestling independently. They should be applauded because it's like they kind of opened the door to a new breed of wrestling fan rather than the good guy, bad guy mindset. They kind of, well, I don't think they put an end to it. I just think they made people more aware of why things were happening. Again, I have a soft spot for the 1970s because I was a kid. I was watching wrestling for the first time. I liked it just the way it was. I didn't need to know what was going on backstage and all that other stuff. To this day, I kind of feel that way. But I don't think that Dave's exposing the business, they said in the 80s. No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't.
If you read Gentleman Jack and Rough Rufus, they were complaining about Jack Claiborne throwing too many drop kicks in Portland in 1935, and how what he was doing had nothing to do with real wrestling. That has always been a complaint.
The Cactus Jack of his day.
Yeah, you
Right?
could
Think
say
about
that.
it.
Yeah,
How many people, including Ric Flair, used to lambast they called it what's
a
cactus that was
glorified
that upset?
stuntman.
Glorified stuntman, that was the one, right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well,
So it's the same thing, it's just different ways of looking at things.
yeah, Jack Claiborne. As I'm reading this book, as I'm researching the book, you learn that he sort of had a signature match-ending stunt where he would dive over the top rope and land back first on the scorer's table, or sometimes dive into the crowd and get counted out. So yeah, very much what a glorified stuntman would do, and he was doing it in the 30s. So yeah,
And
these things don't change.
you know what, you're right. The more things change, the more they stay the same. But you know what has changed? I have a new friend in Ian Douglas, and it's a wonderful thing, and, would you do me the service of telling my listeners about your host of wrestling books, where they can be acquired, and how they can find you and your work in terms of non-book work.
Okay, in chronological order, and we'll do this in order of release. I have The Realest Guy in the Room, The Life and Times of Dan Severn. I have Brute Power, the autobiography of Bugsy McGraw. I have Life is Short and So Am I, the autobiography of Dylan Hornswoggle Postel. Also, shout out to Ross Owen Williams, who did a lot of hard work on that project as well. I have Truth Be Told, the autobiography of B. Brian Blair. I have Bohemian Rhapsody, the unofficial history of pro wrestling's unofficial territory from 1960 to 2020. That is a history of pro wrestling in the Bahamas. Then I have The Kern Chronicles, Volume 1, The Fabulous Wrestling Life of Steve Kern. I've got the follow-up, The Kern Chronicles, Volume 2, The Phenomenal Wrestling Resurgence of Steve Kern. And now book number 8, Gentleman Jack and Rough Rufus, The Rise of Black American Wrestling. And all 8 books are available on Amazon.com.
Awesome. By the way, Bohemian Rhapsody's next for me. I have to read that book. I have to read that book.
I'll send you a copy.
No, you're not. No, you're not. See, you and I have this thing going back and forth. I'm going to sound goofy. I will not accept galleys or free books from the authors. I want to buy their book. They come on my show. The least I can do is pick your books up, man. I mean, come on. It's not that big a deal.
You invited me on the show. The least I can do is send you one. You're promoting me right now.
No. I will buy it and put a bologna sandwich on your table. How's that sound?
Sounds good to me, Bob.
Hey, listen, thanks for coming back. It's always a gas, and continued success. This is it's the Ian Douglas Wrestling Library, folks. Pick up any of those. I mean, and B. Brian Blair, Hornswoggle. There's a lot to choose from with the people that you've covered. And again, the second Kern book was one of the top books of 2024 in my eyes. I thought it was spectacular. I learned so much, not only about history, but about the guy himself. And quite a book. I really, really, really like that book.
Well, I've got to. You mentioned something about the catalog, and one final shout out to my dear and dearly departed friend Jamie Hemmings, who is the person who, somewhat jokingly, after I put out my 3rd book, coined the term the Ian Douglas collection, and I wanted to work really hard to actually put out a set of books that was worthy of that title. So yeah, Jamie Hemmings is the one who coined the term the Ian Douglas collection, and I've been working hard to live up to that.
And Miss Hemmings, that was, I don't know what to say other than Godspeed. Just a tragedy in the wrestling world, and with someone who apparently knew everybody, because the outpouring of affection for her has been a thing to behold. It really has been.
Yeah, that was devastating. I made the decision very quickly immediately that I needed to go to her funeral. I had tremendous affection for her. She had been there for me in many ways that had nothing to do with wrestling. The question I had to ask myself, did I love her enough that she was worthy of? Once my wife gave me the okay, like, yes, you can leave and you can come back the same day, if that's how you want to do it. Was she worth $1,000 and a day of inconvenience to me for me to go and pay my respects to her? Yes, absolutely. In being able to attend her funeral, I walked into the funeral parlor in the funeral home in Colorado Springs. They had a table full of some of her favorite wrestling memorabilia on the table. They had a lot of wrestling books. They had a Macho Man Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan Mega Powers commemorative championship belt sitting on the table. And her husband, Martin, gave me a hug as soon as I walked in, and he directed me over to the table. They had a copy of Bohemian Rhapsody sitting on top of one of the stacks. And I wanted to check to see if I'd signed a copy to her, because I couldn't remember if I had or not. And I opened it up, and the front cover was filled with handwritten notes in her handwriting, mostly praising the content of the book. Like, wow, I didn't expect to hear from that person. Wow, is there anyone that he wanted to speak with that he didn't get to speak with? This is tremendous. Then I opened up the back cover, and like the last 2 pages of the book, it was the same thing, just handwritten notes. And I just broke down crying, because I held her in such high regard, and she'd written reviews of my books, and she always had considerable praise for me. And sometimes you wonder how legitimate that is. And just seeing that, she's in the casket 10 feet away. That is not how I wanted to meet her in person for the first time. But to open the book and see that all of the good feelings that she expressed toward me, that was all real. That was not that I really want to be framing it in the terms of it being worth the expense, because I was there to pay my respects to her, and she was my dear friend. But man, that made it worth every penny. Like, that was absolutely priceless to see that. And she was last word on her. There's so much negativity in pro wrestling, even amongst pro wrestling writers and critics. She's the one pro wrestling book critic that no one ever had a single negative thing to say about, and that it's not because she didn't criticize people's books, because she would, but it's just because she was such a positive and loving person. She was everyone's friend, and the pro wrestling world is a significantly darker place due to her absence.
Hear, hear. But let us leave on a slightly higher note.
I didn't mean to bring the mood down. I am so sorry.
And brighter. No, but you just listening to your talk just remind me of something. We live in an era now where you can develop real friendships electronically through the internet, through, the way we communicate now. It's happened to me about 15 times since I started this podcast. I'm serious. People I consider friends. And it's magic. You don't have to be in the same room to really be fond of someone and learn about them and have fun with them. And it's like, it's a real blessing that we get to communicate in this regard, because we would send letters otherwise back in the old days, right? So this is better. People complain, but this is way better. And I'm thankful for all the friendships that you're able to. I'm sure you feel the same way in that regard.
I've met some of the best friends I've ever had through the internet and online, and still some people that I've never met in person, but I have no doubts that the friendships are authentic.
There you go. Well, I hope you feel that way about us, because I'll tell you what, this has been a real gas getting to know you. And I'll talk to you in a couple months when your next thing comes out. How does that sound?
If all goes according to plan. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, I will hold you to this. You come to me. You tell me when you want to be in the show and you're on again. How does that sound?
That sounds fantastic. I'm wondering what I did to earn that right, but I really appreciate it, Bob. I have fun talking to you, even if there weren't a bunch of other people listening in.
Yeah. But there's the thing. I think the best podcasts in all of the podcast world, not just wrestling, are just good conversation. That's it. I've been enamored listening to Jim Cornette and Brian Last talk about his crabgrass. I mean, it's like you can either laugh or learn something, or just enjoy listening in on someone, and it's almost like public eavesdropping in a way. It's and it can be a lot of fun. And I think that's the secret to podcasts, is good conversation. And you're a good conversationalist, a smart guy, a great writer, and the best is yet to come. I can feel it, my friend.
You always say that, and I appreciate it, because it motivates me not to let you down, Bob.
There you go. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, Ian Douglas. See you soon, all right?
See you soon, Bob. Thank you again.
Attention, Gen Xers. If you'd like to explore the era that appeals to you, look no further than GenerationXWire.com. The generation who grew up with the elite in entertainment, music, movies, TV, books, pro wrestling, and more finally has a one-stop destination for all their Gen X needs. From Aerosmith to Batman to the Killer Bees to the Twilight Zone, there's something for everybody at GenerationXWire.com. You won't find a more eclectic mix of pop culture content than at the leading website that specializes in the greatest generation, GenerationXWire.com. Check it out today. Once again, I have to admit my utter admiration for today's wrestling writers. They're the best ever. I mean that. As I get older, the wrestling writers get better and better. It's going to be a banner 2025 when it comes to wrestling books. We have the new book by Ian Douglas. We have the new book by Keith Elliott Greenberg. We're going to have a new book by Brian R. Solomon. We're going to have a new book by Scotty Richardson, and the list goes on and on. To me, as far as enjoyment goes, wrestling books are what wrestling magazines used to be. I wait for them eagerly to come out, and then I consume every page. Oliver Lee Bateman's one of a kind. I mean, I'm happy to rub shoulders with the new breed of excellent wrestling journalists with a capital J. But anyway, that's it for this one. OutdatedWrestlingHour.buzzsprout.com. You can find every one of our episodes there. I will never Patreon you for old shows. Just jump in and hear them. Also, there's a section on the website, I should mention this, that lists 3/4 of the podcast apps you can find us on, because we're on more than is listed there. We're on all kinds of things. I really think, as far as the Outdated Wrestling Hour goes, if there's a podcast app, we're on it. And YouTube. So we're not hard to find. But if you're app phobic, like a lot of seniors are, and I mean that, our audience has to be kind of older, just go to the website and hear it right there. You don't have to memorize anything. It's outdatedwrestling.buzzsprout.com. Bing, bang, boom. There you go. No sweat, no muss, no fuss. Write to us at outdatedwrestling@gmail.com, as I mentioned, every week. Find me on Facebook. I'm the one saying with Baby King. I'm also still on X, even though I don't usually mention it, but I am on X. I'm also on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Threads as Outdated Bob, by the way. Outdated_Bob, I think the actual name is. If you're looking for me, I doubt it, but in case you need to, that's what it is. I think that puts a nice little bow on this one. I hope you had fun. Informative as it was. Joe Puccio, thanks again, my humble co-host. We're going to be hearing a lot more from Joe every single week moving forward, making the show better and better. And I'm very lucky that Joe agreed to come on a regular basis on our program. And I hope you're enjoying his contributions as well. Till then, for Joe and myself, I leave you the words of Ringo Starr. And actually, Joni Mitchell once said this too. Peace and love.